Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen, in the second hour. Now, in the first hour, if you thought the subject was a little bit too much, that's okay. I believe the same thing too. And it was a little bit too much for me, but you know what? I did do the research. I went on the internet and I did find out that the science does exist. The science of mind control does exist. Now, if anyone's using it, I don't know. I can't tell you. Steve Lynch wrote the book. It happened to him, and he wrote a book about it. So you go out there and discover this stuff yourself and see exactly what is going on. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest in the second hour is Alison Weir. Alison founded an organization called If Americans Knew. Her organization is very simple. She wants to tell the American people the truth about the Palestinians. Alison had produced quite a few DVDs, and you can go on her website, ifamericansknew.com, and order those DVDs. She has done her latest DVD, actually. We were hoping to show you some of that, but we're not going to be able to because the format on the DVD is a little bit different than the machines that we have, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to show you some of her work. But in a nutshell, what she does, Alison used to be the editor of a newspaper in California, Northern California. And then she was just like any other American who gets the news from the sources of news that we know as CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, and the rest of them. Until finally she decided, you know what, I need to look into this myself, and decided that she's going to tell the truth. She's going to spend the rest of her life. Her mission is to tell the truth about what's going on. Welcome to the show, Alison.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Alison, tell me, let's talk about If Americans Knew. I know you've been on the program before, but now we have a lot more viewers. Our viewing area has expanded a lot, so we have a lot of people who don't know who Alison is. Tell me a little bit about If Americans Knew.
I'd be happy to, thank you. As you described it, I really was in the situation most Americans are in about 6 years ago. I happen to be from a Protestant background. My father was Catholic, so I sort of have a Christian background across the spectrum. And like many Americans, I had never really studied or looked into the Israeli-Palestinian issue before. I'd never been to the region, and I had grown up, of course, with a special sympathy toward Israel, from what had happened in World War II, etc. But I knew that I didn't know much about it. So when this current Palestinian uprising began about 6 years ago, I just was curious about what it was and began to follow the news reports more closely. As you mentioned, my background is journalism. I was the editor of a small newspaper. And so when I paid attention to the reporting on this issue as a journalist, I noticed that it seemed to me that it was very one-sided. We were getting very thorough reports about Israel and from the Israeli point of view, and that's valuable to get that. But I noticed that we weren't getting as much information about Palestine, and I felt that we needed to get that information too. So because of the Internet, I started to go on and look at other sources of information, the websites from the Palestinian territories directly and from Israel also directly, and started to see a great deal of very important information that was not being reported in the American media. After a few months of that kind of research, I was so astonished and outraged at the huge distortion that I was starting to become aware of, that I finally decided to quit my job in Sausalito, California, and travel over to the West Bank and Gaza Strip as a freelance reporter. I wanted to see for myself what was going on and to determine for myself what the facts really were on that issue.
Okay. Alison, after Israel's war against Lebanon, the world kind of forgot completely about the Palestinians. I mean, I understand that during the war, the news media was concentrating on what's going on in Beirut and forgetting the slaughter that was going on in Gaza and the West Bank. But why is it still that way? I mean, what is the media and the world media, what are they busy with these days? Because Israel is going into Palestine and killing Palestinians every single day. They just killed like 5 children in Gaza. Why? What's the media busy with?
You're right. This has been consistently the problem. As you said, just today, 5 civilians at least. By now, the number quite likely has gone up. But by early this morning, it was 5 civilians killed within a period of 9 hours. 3 of them were children. One of them was a 35-year-old woman who was shot point blank by Israeli soldiers, and then she bled to death for 4 hours while Israeli forces did not allow an ambulance to take her to a hospital. This is unfortunately the type of thing that is going on in the West Bank and in Gaza almost every single day. You know, occasionally there's a day where nobody is killed, but not all that often. And even in those days when no one is killed, people have been injured, imprisoned, beaten, etc. It is an outrageous situation and very newsworthy. So why, as Americans, are we not getting these stories? That's the question I keep looking at. First of all, of course, I want to know what is going on there. And it's not difficult to find it, fortunately, because we do have the Internet. If you go to our website, ifamericans.org, we have links to many other websites and news sources that have this information. I'm skeptical, as I hope your listeners are. I want to make sure that everything that I say is accurate and the information I have is accurate. And it's not difficult with this issue. We can find these facts out really fairly easily when we know to search for them.
Okay.
But the American media consistently is Israeli-centric in the way it reports this issue. What that means is if something happens to Palestinian civilians or Palestinian children, it is rarely considered newsworthy through the Israeli-centric prism that we are getting in this country. If, on the other hand, something happens to Israeli civilians or Israeli children, that is considered major news, and we get often multiple reports about it.
When was the last suicide bomber or bombing that took place? Do you know?
You know, I don't know that offhand.
But it's been a while. I mean, my point is, it has been a while.
That's right.
Because every time you tell somebody that the Israelis are killing the Palestinians every day, and they're going into their hometowns, and they have a whole siege around their cities with a 25-foot high concrete wall, which they call it a fence, they tell you, well, the suicide bombers. And I'm thinking, well, how many suicide bombers were there to start with? But yet people are still talking about suicide bombers, and we have not had a suicide bomber in a long time, but yet Palestinians are still dying.
That's right. You're right. People continually raise that, and it's not their fault. This is what the media is telling them. For example, in the last year, as of a few months ago, when I looked up the specific information, when Hamas had just been elected in a democratic election to be the leading segment of the government of the Palestinian territories, the media kept raising, what about terrorism? And they kept implying that Hamas was a major terrorist organization. What they weren't telling Americans, but the fact was there, so I don't know why they weren't telling their viewers and their readers, there had been a ceasefire by Hamas for the previous entire year. Hamas had not killed anybody. During the previous year, Israel had killed hundreds of people. In 2004, for example, where I have the numbers right at the top of my head because we've done a number of studies of 2004, almost no Americans know that Israeli forces killed at least 179 Palestinian children during that period.
Now,
These are
Alison,
17 and under.
Alison, in the first hour, I've talked to Steve Lynch about mind programming, and but we also talked about the media actually programming the people. Would you think that the American people are being programmed to look at the issue of the Palestinians, Israelis, in such a way where it doesn't matter if all Palestinians die, we don't care?
Well, I think I wouldn't. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see the first half of your show and to hear it. I wouldn't want people to think that I'm saying that there's some sort of vast conspiracy of mind control in the American media. That's not what I feel is the case. I feel there are multiple factors in the situation. But as far as the result is that Americans are being very manipulated, to put it mildly, in the kind of information we're receiving. And I mean that really across the political spectrum. The New York Times and the Washington Post are not as distorted as Fox News, for example, but they are enormously distorted.
Okay.
People that think that those are National Public Radio, many people feel is far better than talk radio, and it usually is far better.
Okay.
But on Israel-Palestine, it is also enormously distorted.
Tell me about your DVD. We're able to show some of it now using computers. Captured Prisoners. Tell me about that DVD.
I'm glad you're showing that one if you're able to. And if people want, they can also see it on our website, and we can mail people a DVD if they just contact us about all four of ours. What happened with Captured Prisoners is we wanted to show the whole story of the situation of prisoners in the Middle East, in Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. Because, of course, the media were making a very great deal, numerous news stories and on the broadcast media about the Israeli soldiers that had been captured in Gaza and in Lebanon. This was a handful, it was 3 soldiers were captured by Hezbollah, and 2 Israeli soldiers were captured in Gaza. We kept hearing that. In fact, the news media, of course, kept saying kidnapped and abducted, which is a bizarre terminology for soldiers that are captured by enemy forces. You know, soldiers are captured all the time in conflicts, and we use that term, captured. But somehow when they're Israelis, this very odd terminology is being used, kidnapped. Well, what we looked into and in our video is that when you talk about prisoners, Israel was already holding over 9,000 Palestinian prisoners. These included over 300 young people, children, quite a few women. In fact,
now, what was their crime, Alison?
We have no way of knowing. In many of these cases, they were never even charged with a crime. There was never even a trial in many cases. It's what's called administrative detention. That means Israel comes and, in effect, kidnap, if that's the term to use, then let's use it here. It takes people, captures people, excuse me, and under Israeli law, if you can call this a legal system, these people do not even have to be charged with a crime, but can be held for 6 months at a time. Then that can be expanded to another 6 months, another 6 months. There are always loopholes. People can basically be kept as long as the Israeli military wants to keep them.
Okay. Alison, stay with me. We're going to have to take a break very quick. We'll be right back. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the DVD and what happened on October 17, 2004 with the AP story. So stay with me. We'll be right back.
So they're making these products cheaper in other countries. They ship them over here, but we still pay more. Speak up, please, Jake.
I was calling the sea.
I was one of the hostages.
We are borrowing $4 billion a day to run this country.
He had very much the same message as George Bush, so people voted.
The American administration, the people that we elected, they really don't work for the United States of America. They work for Israel.
Take truth out of democracy, you take democracy out of the country.
That democracy is not an alien idea in the Islamic world, and that is, again, a
Support
misconception.
100%, I support our truth. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are speaking with Alison Weir of If Americans Knew. Actually, when I gave the earlier, it's ifamericans.knew.org, not .com. Ifamericans.knew.org. Alison, we are going to show your DVD just a little bit and explain to me what's happening here, or what happened on October 17, 2004.
Well, there were an Israeli invasion of the Balata refugee camp just out of Nablus. Several vehicles drove into the camp, as they often do, down the middle of this very crowded street full of children and families and shoppers. It's a very poor area and therefore very densely populated. These Israeli vehicles drove down, basically just to assert their control, to show the people that they were in charge and they would do whatever they wanted. There was almost no stone throwing, very, very little resistance. People were just there. This happens frequently. After about 15 minutes, two of the vehicles withdrew. There was really no reason to be there and no reason to stay. By that time, the little bit of stone throwing had been done by a crowd of boys that were very young. As I recall, they were about 8 or 9 or 10, I was told, had stopped. And these are armored vehicles. So one vehicle, however, remained there. A soldier took out his rifle, aimed in another direction, not the direction where these small stones had been coming from, aimed down this crowded street at a specific young boy who was pre-adolescent, who had not been throwing any stones, who was just on the scene. A number of people around were yelling at the soldier, "Don't shoot, don't shoot, there's no reason to shoot, this is a child, don't shoot." And the soldier pulled the trigger, shot the boy in the abdomen. This was filmed. There were, as often there were newsmen on the scene that are employed by the Associated Press. There were still cameras of that, still photographs of that shooting by AP and by Reuters, and an AP cameraman with a video camera filmed the vehicles coming. They filmed the soldier shooting. They filmed the boy having been shot, holding his abdomen. All of this was filmed. This incident was filmed, and yet AP erased the footage of this entire incident. They never broadcast it to the American public.
Now, weren't the pictures taken by an AP photographer?
Yes.
And they actually did put it up there for a while, or they never showed any of this?
Well, what's interesting is when I traveled there, I wasn't there during this incident. I was there 2 weeks afterwards when I heard reports about it. So I followed it down and interviewed people and, wanted to make sure, is this true? Are people exaggerating? So I went to the hospital. I talked to everybody I could. I filmed much of the conversation. That's why we now have made a video of it. And what we found is that AP, the still photographs that had been taken by AP and by Reuters, we were able to find on the Internet. So at some point, those had been sent out. They had been posted. However, we couldn't find a single American newspaper that printed any of those photographs, probably because there was no news story that went with it. I don't know, I don't yet understand why those photographs were briefly up on the Internet, if the photographers themselves posted them, or if somebody at AP sent them out. But we were able to find those and have some of those on our website and in our video. But as far as the video footage, we couldn't locate any of that because, as the cameraman told us, it had been erased. the footage that was filmed.
Did you contact AP to see what happened to those pictures?
I did. I immediately contacted AP. I went to the bureau, the AP bureau, that is the control bureau for Israel and Palestine. And the control bureau is, of course, in Israel. This accounts for a lot of the problem with our reporting, because even when we think we are getting news reports coming straight from the West Bank or from Gaza, they go through this bureau in Israel, where it edits what it sends out, or sometimes, as in this case, doesn't even send it out at all. So I went to that bureau and I asked them about this footage. I told them what I had discovered, what people had told me, and I asked for their side of the story. Perhaps they had other information that would contradict this. But I was told that they were not allowed to talk to reporters, and this is so unjournalistic to do this. But they said, oh, we can't give interviews. You have to only talk to our corporate headquarters in New York. So when I got back to the U.S., I called up their corporate headquarters in New York, and I talked to their media relations director, Jack Stokes, who is the person you were only supposed to talk to when you have questions about AP. I talked to Jack. I've talked to him before, and I gave him all the details of the information about this incident we had gotten, the license tag of the Israeli vehicle from which the soldier had shot. Every detail that we could give him, I gave him, and I said, please look into this. I am told by multiple sources that AP had footage of this incident and that it was erased. He said, okay. He took all my information. He said, I will look into it, and I will get back to you. Well, of course, a few days later, he still had not gotten back to me, so I contacted him again. And he said, yes, I have looked into it. We have determined it is an internal matter, and we will not tell you anything about it.
Now, the cameraman, off camera, he did confirm that he took the pictures, but management denied that pictures were ever taken.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, I guess that would be someone is controlling that particular media, which is Associated Press. And if they can control the Associated Press, then apparently they can control other media outlets. And that's why we have the problem that we have here in this country about the Palestinians and the Israelis. Now, according to what your organization has done about the like what Israel is doing, as far you compared what Palestinians had done compared with what the Israelis have done. Like, for instance, the Israelis have demolished so many Palestinian homes, and you have the chart to show how many Palestinian homes have been demolished, but there's the Palestinians, they did not even demolish not even one Israeli house. I think there's a lot of facts that people don't know. Like, for instance, how many Palestinians killed compared to Israelis? How many settlements they have, Jewish settlements compared to Palestinian settlements, for instance. Like, for instance, we have a chart that your organization has done, which is a percentage of reported, of death reported in front pages headline and first paragraphs. This is in the San Francisco Chronicle. This was done like between September 29th, 2000 and March 31st, 2001. It shows that only 8% of Palestinian cases were shown on the front pages compared to 18% when, for Israelis, when the numbers of death for Palestinians and Israelis, there's a huge difference between them. How do you explain that?
It's so incredibly huge that it is hard to explain. When we started to do these studies, I remember one of our early studies, the San Francisco Chronicle, one you're mentioning, is one of those. I showed some of our early studies to a friend of mine who was on the faculty at the University of California, Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. He was a professor of journalism. I showed him our findings, the charts that the numbers generate. And when he looked at those, he just looked at them for a few minutes, and then he said to me, there is no way they can justify this. There is nothing they can say that would justify this kind of distortion. It is too large. And we have found that across the board. We found that with the New York Times. We found the television networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, the three primetime networks, were reporting Israeli children's deaths at rates up to 13 times greater than they were reporting Palestinian children's deaths. Across the board, we can continue to find this kind of distortion. And I think one of the causes, Associated Press, AP, is one of the factors. It's certainly not the only one, but it's a major one, because it's the major source of information for many U.S. newspapers across the country. Texas, Utah, Washington, Nevada, Omaha, all over the country uses AP for their information. So if AP is getting footage of children being shot, and I suspect that this one incident that I just happened to stumble upon is not rare. My guess is that this was not a major piece of footage, that they get far worse footage than this, but that we as Americans just don't get to see it.
Okay. Tell me about what's going on with the Palestinians now. I know a lot of them have not received their salaries in a long time, and people are going hungry in Palestine. What's going on there?
It is. It's a growing humanitarian crisis. One of our DVDs is about that. It's a very short one, just 3 minutes, and it's about the situation in Gaza. We made this, I guess, a few weeks ago now. And again, as you say, all the attention was on Lebanon, and that was, of course, a massive human rights tragedy there, with over 1,000 Lebanese killed by Israeli forces, and something like 43, I think it is, Israelis were killed. So all the attention was on Lebanon, and nobody was paying attention to Gaza, which the United Nations had been saying for several years was increasingly at risk of a calamitous situation with people starving. It's gotten worse even since those days. There have been, on top of the fact that Israel is preventing goods from getting in and out of Gaza, so that people have consistently been running out of different types of foodstuffs. At one point there was no bread. The staple of life just wasn't there. Medicines have been increasingly unavailable for people. There are numerous reports by reliable agencies talking about this humanitarian crisis in Gaza. At the same time that there's this crisis, Israeli forces continue to invade. They shell. They've killed a number of people. Today's deaths were just the most recent in a long line of deaths. And again, the American public, who is paying the salaries of those soldiers, is not being told the facts. And we need to, because American taxpayers are giving Israel over $10 million per day of our hard-earned tax money. This is more than we give to any other nation in the world. It makes us accomplices to everything that Israel does. Therefore, we need to know what Israel is doing. Now, some people may feel that they love Israel and anything Israel does is fine with them, but I doubt many people would truly feel that way if they got the full information. And in the end, I'm not, and you're not, I hope, and neither of us, are trying to tell people what to think or what conclusions to draw or what moral decisions they will make. But I want them to have full information so that they can make accurate conclusions and decide how they want their tax money to be used, what they want our government to have in way of policies in the Middle East. And the only way we can make good decisions is if we have full, unbiased information.
Now, your upcoming DVD, you have interviewed people like Eugene Bird, Edwin Peck, Paul Findlay. What did you come up? And all these people are either American politicians who served abroad or congressmen. What are they all saying?
It's fascinating and very enlightening to talk to these experts here in Washington, D.C., where I now live. As you said, in this DVD, we've talked to former ambassadors, career foreign service officers, a Republican congressman who was a congressman from Heartland, Illinois for, I believe it was 22 years. Not yet on the DVD, but we've talked to former CIA analysts and naval admirals. We're talking to people with very strong, very patriotic credentials, experts in the Middle East.
Okay.
And they are all telling us that the policies regarding Israel are disastrous.
Now, my question, which I ask you the same question over and over again, are we ever going to see a news media or media that would basically tell what's going on in Palestine? Because with the wall that Israel has almost finished completing, which they divided cities and they are imprisoning whole cities and demolishing people's homes, killing people, going there at 2 o'clock in the morning, dragging them out of their bedrooms. When are we going to see people crying and saying stop? Because, you know, in World War II, people were not getting the news of what was happening until afterwards, but now we are seeing it happening. You know, we're seeing a Holocaust against the Palestinian people taking place, and we're not stopping it. Has our mentality, the world collective mentality, got used to and got immune to seeing Palestinian bodies and not saying anything about it?
I certainly hope not. And I don't think so, because as we've discussed, Americans aren't, as you know, the rest of the world frequently is. Certainly people in the region are seeing this footage. We need to see it too. I don't like things being censored from me. I like to have full access to information. Now, in terms of the media, will we ever get the full, accurate information? There are two places that I can think of, and only two that come to mind right now in the U.S., that at least are doing an excellent job. There's the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs. You have to look for it when you go to a newsstand. Ask for it. If they don't have it, tell them they should have it in. So the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs is a monthly magazine that's very good. There's another magazine that comes out just every 2 months called The Link. I don't believe that's in newsstands, but often libraries have it. So those are two excellent sources. But apart from that, I really cannot pick another news source that I can recommend to people. Other than sometimes if you have alternative radio stations, sometimes those are good sources. Sometimes there are very alternative publications who have the information. Certainly international publications tend to. But in the end, the reason we are making our videos and putting them out for people, and I hope people will contact us for these DVDs, is because in the end, I think it is up to all of us, to American citizens and everyone else, to start to become the media. That we need to produce our own materials, and then we need to give them out to our neighbors, to show them to our friends, to take them to our libraries, to hand them out. So we are making these videos with, trying to provide the information, and then we are putting them onto a DVD, and we will give them to anybody that will show them on their public access station. We'll give them to your neighbors, hand them out at your shopping mall. This is what we're all going to have to do. We all have to distribute it.
Alison,
now, we do need, I should mention, we're not a rich organization at all, so we do need donations. Okay. Desperately.
Alison, yesterday the Israeli army went into several Palestinian cities and targeted basically these exchange places and banks where like Western Union, for instance, and places like that, and actually destroyed computers and stole money out of these, so Palestinians abroad cannot send to their families who are starving to death in Palestine, which, they controlled money transfer to Palestine. You cannot transfer money to Palestine using banks. But now people are using Western Union to send, $100 here and $100 there. And the Israeli army went in there and destroyed a lot of these places, so people can't receive money anymore. What is the policy? And this just happened yesterday. What is the policy of Israel? Do they want to drive out the Palestinians, or do they want them to basically capitulate and be submissive to the Israelis' will?
I think it's those two. Some segments of Israel are very open with saying that they want to drive them out. The far right wing, but sadly people that are in government. So it's a minority position, and yet it's represented at high levels of the government. Will say right out that they want to transfer all the Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza to Jordan, to another country. This is called ethnic cleansing, and it's what they're calling for. Now, other parts of the government that are not quite so blatant in the type of ethnic cleansing activities they're advocating, basically do want submission. They want the Palestinians to just give up and to say whatever Israel does, we will accept, and that Israel would call peace. Now, of course, nobody in the world will accept huge injustice. A little bit of injustice, or even a lot of injustice. Maybe people, when there's been, when they're beaten down enormously, might accept it, but not the kind of injustice that Israeli governments continue on trying to impose on the Palestinians.
Okay.
But I think you're right with this massive, really, theft of Palestinian resources, of going into banks, basically, and just robbing the bank. Israeli forces doing this. The intention is to just make it impossible for Palestinians to function.
Okay. Alison,
to try
stay
to
with
make
me.
it miserable.
Stay with me. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are speaking with Alison Weir of ifamericans.org. ifamericans.org. Alison, let's put things in historical perspective here so the viewers can understand exactly what's going on. Back in 1947, there was a partition plan to divide the land of Palestine between the Jews. There was no Israel at the time, the Jews and the Arabs. And the Jews who had about 32% of the population ended up with 52% of the land, and the Palestinian Arabs, who were 2/3 of the population, ended up with 48%, which now the area that the Palestinians are willing to accept and saying we will accept that is only 22% of the land. And if Israel continues with its wall that it's building, they're only going to have about 9% of the land. Is that how? I mean, is that an accurate historical perspective there?
That is accurate. That's right. That's right. And in fact, originally, the land of Palestine was 5% Jewish. Originally, it was 95%. What we now call Palestinians, which are Muslims and Christians. It was 80% Muslim, 15% Christian, and 5% Jewish. And as you say, the partition recommendation was enormously unfair in that it was giving the population that was only 1/3 of the population was getting really many experts say it was as high as 55% of the land that they were getting, despite the fact that that population only owned at most about 8% of the land. So a group that owned 8%, and again most experts say it was around 6%, maybe 5%, were getting probably about 55% of the territory.
Okay. And now once they had established the State of Israel in 1948, they actually driven out the Palestinians, most of the Palestinians who were in that piece of land that was allocated to the Jews. They drove them out in different types of ways. Some of them actually were massacred, where a whole town was massacred, and the rest of the little villages, when they heard the news, they just escaped with their lives.
That's right. In fact, there were quite a few massacres. I think it was at least 33 of entire villages. The other thing that a lot of Americans don't know, because the myth that we grow up believing, is that Israel was this small little, beleaguered nation that was suddenly, for no reason, attacked by 5 Arab armies. Well, again, you need to always look and research these things for yourself, because what you find is that actually the Zionist army, because of course it wasn't yet Israel, was far larger, had more troops under arms and more weaponry than all 5 of the other armies put together. At all points in the war, the Israeli army was larger than the other armies. The other thing that people don't realize is that the offensive violence actually began with the Zionists, the pre-Israel army, not with the Arab armies. Again, the myth is that the Arab armies, for no reason, just attacked Israel. The fact is that Israel had already started fighting after the partition plan, had already expelled a number of Palestinians from villages and towns that were in the part of the plan that were supposed to be the Palestinian state. So they had already crossed the border of this partition plan and taken quite a bit of additional land. They had committed at least one major massacre before a single Arab army had come in. The Arab armies, after this massive beginning ethnic cleansing that had already begun. And even when these Arab armies did come in to fight, they fought only the battles, I believe, in every single case. There perhaps was one exception, but I believe there weren't any, actually. The battles were fought on the Palestinian land, not on Israel at all. So in terms of invading Israel, it just did not occur. And again, to people that have grown up and think they know this issue, my description of the history may sound very surprising to them, but if they will research it honestly, as I've done, this is what you discover.
Now, when we think of the Palestinian people, probably the average person out there thinks all they want to do, their young men and women want to do, is grow up and be suicide bombers. How much the percentage of actual Palestinians who are in the resistance? I mean, how is the attitude of the Palestinians in general? Do they want resistance, or do they want peace? Do they want to live with Israel? Do they want to drive Israel into the sea? What do you see from your research?
Well, when you go there and talk to people, as I've done, you find that, people are like us. Most people just want to live their lives. Most of us here, if we were invaded, really would run away. We wouldn't want to fight. We're not warriors. Most of us would rather just have a family or, do whatever our profession is. And that's how it is there. People will continually say, we just wanted peace. We just want to live here. We want our lives. Now, people that were pushed out of Israel, many of those people, especially that are outside the Palestinian territories, want to be able to go back to their homes, which of course they have every right to do. You find most people are not active members of the resistance, certainly, and far, far fewer have anything to do with the suicide bombings. Now, again, the feeling that Americans are given is that there are just, thousands of suicide bombings, that everybody is doing that. And, of course, that's not the case at all. I wish I had the current figures of the total number of suicide bombers, but it's really quite small. When you look at it compared to the number, to the population, it's well under 1%. It's well under 0.5% of the population.
Okay.
It's really infinitesimal.
Speaking
but on the other hand, just to make the point that, of course, the horrifying part of suicide bombers is that they kill civilians. Well, that is tragic and wrong. But let's look at the fact of civilians being killed on both sides, and you find that Israeli bombers and Israeli forces kill many, many more times, many more civilians than suicide bombers have ever killed.
And speaking of suicide bombers, I always keep telling the story of this young lady who was an attorney, as a matter of fact, and who was one of the suicide bombers. And her brother was getting married, so she goes to Jordan to pick up some stuff for the wedding. In the meantime, her brother and her fiancé are sitting down under a fig tree in the afternoon having tea, which is a favorite for Palestinians, hot tea. And the Israeli jeeps drove up and killed both of them. So she receives a phone call saying it's not going to be a wedding, you need to come home. And when she came home, she went straight to the morgue and saw her fiancé and her brother's bullet-riddled bodies laying there, covered with blood. She goes home for a whole week. She did not talk to anyone. She just sat in her room. Her parents were really very concerned about her. And one day she got up and got dressed as she was going to the office. And her parents said, thank God, we thought we were going to lose her. And that evening, the news came up that she was a suicide bomber in Jerusalem. So the point I'm trying to make, Alison, is suicide bombers could be just the average. I mean, this woman was an extremely successful woman who had her whole life ahead of her. But she was desperate. She came into a desperation, and she had to revenge the killing of her brother and her fiancé, because her whole life was destroyed in that afternoon. So when people think of suicide bombers, they think of these vicious, insane people. Do you have any other profiles for suicide bombers?
Well, there's a book on suicide bombers, and of course people. Again, we keep hearing about Palestinian suicide bombers, but the majority
are they crazy? I mean, is that the book? Are they crazy?
The research has shown that occupation is what creates suicide bombings. The Tamils in southern India have had quite a few suicide bombings. This is what creates it. It's not specifically tied to any particular religion or any particular group of people. It's tied to when you are living under an oppressive occupation. This seems to be the tragic result.
Okay. Tell you what, let's go to the phones. We've been having people waiting on the line for too long. Go ahead, Freedom.
Yes, the reason why I want to ask Miss Alison Weir a question is this. We've been hearing here in America that every Israeli male and every Israeli female in some way, shape, or form have something to do with the defense of Israel. They're either in the National Guards, Reserve, or something. So when Palestinian suicide bombers blow Israel up, wouldn't all the innocent people be the children and the elderly? Thanks very much.
Thank you. Did you hear the question?
I could hear. I couldn't hear it very well. If you could repeat.
What he was saying is most of the young people in Israel are actually in the service. It's mandatory. Military service is mandatory there. So when suicide bombers target young people, I think his point was you know, they're not targeting little children and elders, but they are targeting young people who are actually in the army.
That's quite true. That's an important point. I'm glad the caller thought to bring that up, because that's the case. It's supposed to be 100% military service in Israel. Now, of course, there are large groups of people that manage to get out of it, but it's still about 60%. So many times, when our news reports don't tell us about the people that were killed, it turns out quite often they're in the military.
Okay, let's go back.
You know, a number of
Let's
cases.
go back to the phones. We only have like 3 minutes left. Go ahead, Tom. Tom, you're on. Go ahead.
Yes, if only Alice.
Okay. Alison, we only have like 2 minutes left. Again, how can people get your DVDs?
They can go to our website, ifamericans.org, and they can email us, or they can phone 202-543-2044.
Okay, very good. Alison, I want to thank you for coming on the program. It was a pleasure again, and definitely we will have you here back soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a couple of minutes left. We kind of very much been bringing different people to talk about different subjects, but the Palestinian subject is something that we probably have neglected for a while, because we had the war on Lebanon, and then we had the 9/11 5th anniversary, and we needed to cover events with that. And but one thing that the Palestinians have been going through every day, if the war in Lebanon lasted for 34 days, the Palestinians have been going through this every day of their lives for about 40 years now. And since 2000 until now, that's 6 years, they have been going through hell every day of their life. There are walls around their cities. To go from one city to another city, you need to have a permission, and they need to know exactly why you're going in and out of that city, which means commerce, which means factories, which means the economy of the Palestinian people, where it's being killed and devastated by this wall. This wall is not only surrounding these towns, but also it goes through in the middle of a town and actually separates people. I went there, and I have done a documentary on this a couple of years back, and I went there where a man and his mother were living across the streets from each other, and now they are separated by this wall, that in order for him to go and visit his mother, it takes him a whole day to travel, because besides these walls in Palestine, there is also military checkpoints, and these checkpoints you have to, you can't drive your cars all over because of these checkpoints, and a lot of these checkpoints you can't go through. So you need to have somebody drop you off at a drop-off point. You have to walk through and catch another cab to go on the other side, and hoping that they will allow you to go. People have not received their wages in over 4 months now in Palestine. Factories have been shutting down. Basically everything that has to do farmers, they can't even sell their product. The Palestinian people need your help. There's a Holocaust that is going on in your name, ladies and gentlemen, because we in the United States are paying for this Holocaust against the Palestinians. You are responsible. You are paying for it. We'll see you next week, Thursday, 8 o'clock. Good night.